Good evening. I'm Stephen Levine, the president of CalArts, and it's a pleasure to welcome you. It's a pleasure to welcome you to REDCAT, the Roy and Edna Disney CalArts Theater, which is CalArts' downtown center for contemporary art. Tonight, and it's part of why we're a little slow getting started, tonight we're inaugurating two different things. The first is a new relationship between the President's Forum at REDCAT and the Crawford Family Forum at KPCC. And I'd like to introduce Oscar Garza, who is the senior producer for The Frame, the new arts program on KPCC.
Good evening, everybody. I can't see anybody. On behalf of Bill Davis, who's the president of KPCC, and on behalf of the show that I produce, The Frame, about a little over 3 months ago, we launched a daily arts and entertainment show. It airs at 3:30 every afternoon. And it's a show that's long overdue for this market, I would say. It's an idea that's been kicking around the station for a while, and they finally got the resources together to do it. For those of you who know me, and I have many friends here, Diane and Harry, probably thinking, he looks like he's aged 3 years in the last 3 months. Running a daily show is quite an enterprise, but we're having a great time doing it. There's a couple of really sort of fundamental things about that show and its importance to where I see it fits. I mean, it makes perfect sense for a public radio station to be doing this kind of show. One of the main things that we're about is looking at the creative process. I've always maintained that the worst time to interview an artist of any sort is when their work is finished and in whatever form it is, because at that point they're saying the same. They've been thinking about this too long, and they're saying the same thing to everybody over and over again. The best time to talk to them is when they're making something new, when they're trying to figure something out. So that's following the creative process of artists is one of the things we're doing on an ongoing basis. The other thing that we're doing is making sure that that we represent the diversity of the arts community here. The arts community in Los Angeles and Southern California is as diverse, if not more diverse, than the community at large. And so what I wanted to say as part of my welcome is that I'm of two minds about this evening, and I'll tell you why. Of course, I'm glad it's happening at some level, and I'll tell you why I'm glad it's happening, because in the last 2 months, I have become aware of a couple of public forums that were being organized or were happening here in Los Angeles, put on by very prominent organizations that you would know if I named them. And they were each about sort of status of art and culture and various parts of that community in Los Angeles. And both of them were made up, the entire panels, 4 people on each one of these each one of these evenings. The panels were completely white. And I was, I don't know how else to put it, but I was stupefied about how that can happen in this day and age in this city. And in both those instances, I mean, I knew the people who were putting them on, and I, sort of brought it up. I brought it to their attention. I don't say that for any other reason other than, we hold ourselves to the same standard at the station and with the show. So I'm glad this is happening for that reason alone. On the other hand, I'm sorry at some level that it has to happen, right? Because what we ideally like to see is that the diversity of our community is represented day in, day out at institutions large and small in Los Angeles. But, this has been going on for a long time. It's an ongoing struggle, and we're all part of it together. So thank you to CalArts for this partnership. We're excited about it, and listen to the show. It's on at 3:30 every afternoon on KPCC. It's 89.3. You can listen to it via podcast, and you can all the shows are archived at kpcc.org. So again, thank you very much. Enjoy the evening. You're in good hands.
And if you listen to the show, you may find yourself listening to yourselves, because after about an hour of presentation and conversation, we will open up this to questions from the floor. I'll tell you now, and then I'll tell you when it happens. that we'll ask you, because we are, I guess that's a camera. This is being filmed and recorded, and so we'll ask you to walk to the aisle where there'll be microphones on either side so we can actually capture who you are and what you have to say. So first we're celebrating this new relationship with KPCC, which is very exciting. Second, we've launched a new initiative at CalArts. We're still working on the name of it, but basically our Latin American U.S. Latino initiative. It's recognizing that since the beginning, CalArts has attracted wonderful artists from Latin America. In more recent years, the U.S. Latino population at CalArts is growing every year to the point where now the theater school actually can have a bilingual theater company as part of its regular activity, which would not have been thinkable 20 years ago for us. We're proud of those developments. We're proud of the fact that REDCAT has become one of the central importers of new creative work from Latin America. We're proud of the fact that our Community Arts Partnership, our youth programs at 45 sites around the city, are reaching underserved children, roughly 80% of whom are from various U.S. Latino populations. So tonight marks the kind of public coming out of this enterprise. The enterprise itself has three components. The bottom line of it is the bottom line of tonight, which is trying to do our small part in making more visible what should be and is quietly the huge Latino presence in art making in the United States. But that somehow, as in the panel that Oscar just referred to, seems to be easy to forget about. For all my adult life, there have been, well, when there was a Newsweek in a time, every 10 years they would write an article about the emerging Latino majority in the United States, or the majority in California, or the majority in Los Angeles. And they run basically the same article every 10 years and then forget it for 10 years and then come back to it again. Well, the data is there. We are now a majority-minority city. I was given at dinner some data that says 70,000 every month, 70,000 18-year-olds who are going to merge into the, Castulo, if I get this wrong, correct me, are going to, of Latino origin, but are U.S. citizens, are going to emerge into the voter population. An amazing phenomenon that you wonder why it hasn't already changed the world more, but clearly will. So the question we really, so our initiative at CalArts is underneath, that's what we want to accomplish. We're an educational institution, so the way we accomplish it is by raising scholarships so the best kids, most gifted kids from various backgrounds can actually be at CalArts, both U.S. Latino and Latin American, by creating more exchange relations with institutions in Latin America, as well as community-based institutions of various sorts in the United States, and by engaging in collaborative creative projects. Some of you may have been here 2 years ago when, with the University of Guadalajara, we produced the play Timbuktu, which opened in Los Angeles. It was well, in both cities, the Spanish language roles were played by Mexican actors, and the US roles were played by graduate students and young actors from the United States. And when it was here, it had English language subtitles. And when it, nope, yes, English language. And when it was in Guadalajara, it had, it was a world that we live in, and it should be natural. But it was hard work to raise the funds to actually make it happen. So part of this effort is to make things like that happen, or our piece of it, make it happen much more often. Then underneath this is this question of why we keep forgetting. Why the complexity, and this now goes beyond the Latino population, why the complexity of our culture, which is actually what makes it interesting, why we so often we focus on it for 10 minutes and then we forget who we are. And the political process seems to be often a deliberate effort in forgetting who we are, or in making sure that who we are can't vote. The cultural process of a lot of our institutions seems to be in some way involved in that same activity. Not, I think, with any ill intent, but with ill result. And so tonight I really wanted to address the question of why we can't hear the voices. Part of what's behind tonight is an event I attended at the Latino Theater Center in the fall, Encuentro, a meeting of Latino theater companies from around the United States. Amazing performances, but mostly not arriving at mixed audiences, let's say. At least I think that's the case. So we want from various angles to try to get at the question of why we're not doing better as a country and as a society. We have a remarkable panel. I'm going to introduce them all to you now, so we can be done with that part. They all have long biographies. This will take about the first half an hour of the evening.
Edit, Steve, edit.
Yeah. Edit?
Edit.
Yes.
Who said that?
Edit them.
Okay, very briefly then.
Yeah.
Our first speaker tonight will be Jeff Chang, who runs the Institute for Diversity in the Arts at Stanford University. He's won all sorts of awards, and there's lots to be said, but editing it down.
Yes.
This, in the fall of 2014, a remarkable book came out called Who We Be, The Colorization of America, which I would just, I hope we have some copies in the bookstore out here, but I would recommend it to you all. And I hope that's part of what Jeff is going to talk from today, which is in a way directly on the subject I just described. And then there's an earlier book, there's actually lots of books by Jeff, but there's an earlier book, which I just love, called Can't Stop, Won't Stop, A History of the Hip-Hop Generation, which gets very close to the street level, and it's one revelation after another about how a cultural development happened and spread from neighborhood to neighborhood. Again, I recommend it to you all. For me, at least, it was a measure of how little we actually know about the mechanics of what's actually happening in the culture we all live in. We sometimes get exposed to the results, but how it happens is really a thrilling story by itself. So we'll start with Jeff, who I hope will frame the general question. Then Rita Gonzalez sends her apologies. She was going to be with us tonight, but is sick with the flu. Which is a credible excuse, because we've all had the flu. We are very fortunate that Harry Gamboa was, at the last minute, I mean, really the last minute, this was what, about 2 this afternoon?
Wow.
Generously agreed to participate. Again, there are so many, I could spend the evening just telling you all the places his work has been exhibited, but you will know him first from, as part of the really history-making collective ASCO with Gronk and Patsy Valdez and Willie Heron. He is now on the photography and new media faculty at CalArts. He is currently conducting projects really all around the world at a quite phenomenal rate. We were lucky to catch him in town. And the tenuous link with Rita is I wanted her to talk about phantom sightings, the post-Chicano generation in art. And Harry was in it. Right. You don't have to do anything with that fact when you speak if you choose not to. But I thank you for being with us. Then I think you probably all know Diane Rodriguez. She has played an important role in the culture of this city for a very long time. She's currently Associate Artistic Director of the Center Theater Group, which she's done since 1995. But over the years, she's been Associate Producer there, Director of New Play Development. She was Director between 1995 and 2005 of the Latino Theater Initiative and was a resident artist there. She was an associate artist with the Cornerstone Theater Company and began, I learned today, instead of coming to CalArts, she went off to be an actress with El Teatro Campesino, something for which we'll never forgive her. But it...
They turned me down at CalArts.
Oh. Revenge.
It was fine. It was good. It was cool. I did okay. True.
Someday I'm going to write a book about all the great people we've turned down over the years. It's going to be a very long book. You make your best guesses, and you're... Well, I won't. I'll stop. And our fourth panelist is Rodrigo Garcia, a wonderful filmmaker. He's probably best known for his films 9 Lives, for Albert Nobbs, which was nominated for 3 Academy Awards, with Glenn Close, for Mother and Child with Annette Bening and Naomi Watts. He just now premiered a new film, not just now, but at Sundance this year, a new film whose title I have forgotten. The title is?
Last Days in the Desert.
Last Days in the Desert. He's also co-chief executive officer of Indigenous Media, Next Generation Digital Studio, is co-creator of WIGS, or WIGS, digital drama channel offering 180 episodes of scripted content. Wonderful, productive artist, working within the constraints of and the opportunities of the commercial industry as it exists, and will bring, I think, another interesting perspective to our general conversation. So with that, I'll quote you a couple of numbers, and then we will begin. There are and this is 2010 census, and you probably mostly know this. 9.8 million people living in Los Angeles County, 4.7 million are of Hispanic or Latino audience. A very large population to lose, to not be able to find. 3.5 million are of Mexican descent. And this is growing every year. That really is the framing circumstance, which is the reason we need to ask these questions about how well we are doing as a culture in representing ourselves. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Jeff Chang. Jeff.
First off, just a big thank you to Stephen and to Patricia and the CalArts staff. I'm also just incredibly honored to be on this panel. I'm pinching myself. I can't really believe it. It's pretty dope. So I prepared some notes because I'm maybe anal like that. And I guess I'm speaking here as somebody who's coming from an Asian and Pacific Islander background. I'm Chinese and Hawaiian, and I think somebody who is able to then see in the Latino experience, the Chicano experience, sort of this radical diversity and recognize this radical diversity, right, of experience, and also somebody who, in a lot of respects, also understands as well what it means to be searching for representations, mostly in vain, maybe a little bit less now than before, but mostly in vain for representations of that kind of radical diversity. But and I was a little worried about feeling a little impolite, I guess. But I think Mr. Garza and Mr. Levine's statements earlier made me feel a little empowered to say this. I feel a little weary about having these kinds of conversations all the time, right? About underrepresentation, about inequity, about inequality. But I also recognize, this is the burden of representation that those of us who are seen as other are forced to carry a lot, right? We always have to continually restate our case that we are human too, that we have a wide variety, a wide diversity of humanity. And this is, of course, the impetus, right, behind the Black Lives Matter movement, behind the protest movements that developed around the border killings of Brisenia Flores and Anastasio Hernandez Rojas, and now, of course, around Antonio Zambrano Montes, right? These are events that are all impacting us in a lot of respects. And it's also, of course, happening in the culture where we're continually told that our stories don't matter, our work doesn't matter, our art doesn't matter. And so my weariness is sort of partly born of always having to fight off this cynicism, right? The idea that we do have to come back around and fight this all the time, that every day you wake up in the morning, you kind of have to deal with it. So it's not the kind of weariness that one gets from so-called compassion fatigue, whatever that is, of the post-racial subject or whatever. I'm just really frustrated with the way that colorblindness gets recreated in every generation and what that means for us. Because people of goodwill and bad will are trying to make the case that, we don't see difference, we don't see color, we don't see any of that kind of stuff. It'd be better if we all just kind of ignore this, we'd all be better off. That we're all responsible for our own opportunities that we can make. And I think, to be sure, at this particular point in US history, we're at a point where the national conversations around race have restarted, right? We see the polls show that folks in the US believe that race is actually the #2 most important issue behind the economy right now. And I'm more optimistic, I think, around some of the individual ways in which this conversation is playing out. The water cooler conversations, the kind of things that we talk about amongst ourselves, than I am about what's happening in the bombast of the media. So the book that I wrote here came out in October of 2014, and of course a month later, after Obama issued his executive orders, executive action around immigration, and after the non-indictment of Darren Wilson, the conversations changed. We were having some very good, some very painful conversations when I say be on public radio or that kind of thing. After that, it got really coarse, and it became the type of thing where people would really want to pound you over the head with, why are you not agreeing that we should all be colorblind? And the hate mail comes in, and I'm getting called a race hustler, and all kinds of crazy stuff, right? But I noticed that it became very coarse, and it's really tiring. It's just tiring. I'm over here, I'm like, I spent 8 years on this thing. I got 400 pages of proof here that colorblindness doesn't exist, that it only exists when we want to talk about changing racial injustice, when we want to talk about changing inequity and inequality. And what do you have? Not you, not all of you, but what do you have? You who's accusing me of being a liar about these kinds of things, you guys have your blindness. You have your obstinance in that kind of thing. And I'm reminded of a lot of the literature that's coming out now about racism from sociologists who say, we don't need racists anymore. Racism doesn't require KKK-type racists anymore. It doesn't need that anymore. What we need really is just for people of goodwill or bad will to not do anything, because the status quo leads us towards segregation, towards separation, towards alienation. And if we do absolutely nothing, if we see nothing, and then because we see nothing, we do nothing, then the inequalities continue and they intensify. And so in the arts, that means, of course, that we continue to see underrepresentation, crazy underrepresentation of Latinos in arts institutions. And at the same time, what we see is the development, because it's not like artists are going away or creators are going away. But what we see is the development of parallel worlds, you know, and that these are artificially separated by capital and also by this sort of ideology of racism. We live kind of shadow lives to each other. And so a lot of us, and I think I would like us to maybe bring back this word. It's kind of musty. People used it a lot in the 80s and the 90s and then kind of fell into disuse and disrepair and the sort of cultural amnesia that happens. But the word's cultural equity, right? People used to rally around this. It was a rallying cry. And it's really just about representation and access. It's about allowing voice and presentation, really, right, to an entire diversity of people. And the musicologist and folklorist Alan Lomax wrote one of the best defenses of cultural equity in the 1970s in an article for UNESCO. He said, the problem of the era was that cultural diversity was at global risk. He said, a gray out is in progress. A mismanaged, over-centralized electronic communication system is imposing a few standardized, mass-produced, and cheapened cultures everywhere. And it's really interesting to kind of think about that now, 40 years later, where we have literally a channel for every possible identity market that you can identify. And he called for the principle of cultural equity, the protection, expression, and propagation of local marginalized cultures. Now, his interest was primarily in music. He was actually the person who recorded Muddy Waters, a lot of the folk music. He was one of those folks who wanted to preserve that. And in that, you could see sort of the kinds of amazing exchanges and discussions that then lead to the outbursts of rock and roll and all this other kind of stuff. But he argued that local musics had a deep importance to all of humanity. But I think when he wrote about it, he could have been talking about cultural production for marginalized folks in general. And this is what he wrote. This is the argument that he gave of why cultural equity was so important. Because local cultures, or cultures, right, marginalized cultures, serve as the human baseline for receiving and reshaping new ideas and new technologies to the varied lifestyles and environmental adaptations of world culture. Number two, that they perpetuate values in human systems which are only indirectly connected with level of productivity, right? And they give women and men, old and young, a sense of worth. And three, they form a reservoir of well-tested lifestyles out of which the species can construct the varied and flexible multicultural civilizations of the future. Since they are living symbol systems, they have growth potential of their own. As such, they are the testing grounds for the social and expressive outcomes of human progress. And he wrote, practical men often regard these expressive systems as doomed and valueless, yet whenever the principle of cultural equity comes into play, these creative wellsprings begin to flow again. And so in the 80s, we begin to see cultural equity framed in the language of self-esteem. And in that sense, it's dismissed, right, as pandering, as selfish, as balkanizing. But this is really a misinterpretation, really, because cultural equity is about refusing conformity. It's about refusing assimilation. And it doesn't only confer pride and resistance, which is threatening enough, and we could just talk about the image, right, that was the basis for phantom sightings, the placas at LACMA, right? These were threatening enough to the status quo, but it also confers belonging, because it's also a question of inclusion and recognition. It's about ending marginalization. So for those who are considered the other, attaining cultural equity, it's about becoming part of a community, right? It's about becoming part of a polity. It's an act of self-creation, of one who can not only receive influence, but also influence, right? One who has the agency then to change others as well as oneself. And that's why it's important. And so Lomax was arguing that cultural diversity is just as important as biodiversity, and that both were necessary to support the vitality of all communities, not just the marginalized communities, the nation, the world, the survival of the human race. Now, we know that there's places where cultural equity is always in motion, in youth movements, right, in subcultures. They're happening away from the centers of contemporary culture. It's where hip-hop really got started. And the challenge, I think, for those of us who are now ensconced in arts institutions is catching up to that kind of energy, and breaking it wide open for everybody. And that means, I think, recommitting ourselves to access, to representation, to distribution, to exchange, because when we foster this radical kind of diversity, we all win.
Just a question before we go on. Who We Be talks again and again about the sort of redefinitions of the situation
That artists make, yeah, through the decades, yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Where do you want to go with this?
Where I really want to go is underneath the whole story. Is it just people who have protecting their territory against people who want some of it?
Are you talking about the movements that are kind of rising up, that they're trying to protect their movements against?
And I'm talking about once one gets beyond the street level and gets to the institutional level.
Oh, I see.
Where so much energy that is rising, a sort of ceiling is put on it.
Yeah.
And then a few people are allowed to pass through and enter the larger whole.
Right. And yeah, and I think that's why it's so important for us to kind of be able to build these structures that are more porous, you know, that allow folks to be able to move through and flow freely, you know, between whatever, the counterculture and the mainstream, between the underground and the mainstream, I suppose. I think this would be a really good discussion for all of us to kind of have together about what the costs of that are for the artists, as well as what the ultimate kinds of goals are for movements. But I think I was trying to make the argument in the large sense, in the moral sense, that if we don't address these questions of cultural equity, then we just continue to reify the structures that keep us separate, that keep us unequal. And so I feel like the notion of trying to bring back the idea of cultural equities is really just about that. It's about reintroducing this debate. Now that we've gone post, you know, everything, post-identity, really, in all these different kinds of ways, like, let's try to figure out what the discussions are that need to happen about the structures that still haven't really been changed.
Does that mean we're post-progress?
No, I don't think so. I don't know that I believe in the post thing, unless, yeah. But
in a way, it's a perfect transition to Harry, because I can remember in the early days of ASCO a sort of basic assumption that the institutions were just in the way.
Yeah. I guess I was able to tell Howard Fox, who was a former curator of LACMA, that the only reason we spray painted the museum was because we couldn't lift it and throw it into the tar pits. You know, it's, again, at that time period, I was 21 years old, and a different kind of energy, sort of very, and even at 21, I was pretty much a veteran of a social movement, the Chicano movement. I grew up in East Los Angeles. I was actually born quite nearby here. Kind of experienced the ultimate kind of array of social dysfunction and repression that could be experienced in America during that era. And at the same time, one of the kind of ideas that came through, and it actually came from this particular neighborhood, which is sort of Bunker Hill, a little bit here. There was a neighborhood here called the Diamond neighborhood, and it kind of came from an old Pachuco gang concept, which was from El Paso, Texas, was that one must appear as though they are a diamond from a distance. And again, my generation and basically the group of people that pre-OSCO, we used to refer to ourselves as jetters, was the idea that a diamond is formed from extreme heat and extreme pressure, and we're all carbon-based creatures, and if it's done wrong, you're going to be a lump of coal. And if you do it just right, you might actually be harder and shinier and more beautiful than anyone would expect. And besides that, you could cut through anything. And so, that was sort of the drive. And because I grew up in a particular tumultuous period, and during the era of Richard Nixon and J. Edgar Hoover, I was actually particularly singled out as in a Senate subcommittee report, which is available at Stanford at the archives. You could go read it, in which I was listed as very fine company. But the idea was that in the document it states that I should be someone, Gamboa should be someone who should never receive an education, because if he's ever put in front of people, he might actually have the opportunity to influence people younger than him. And so, and one of the ideas that I've expressed to people was I kind of grew up in the midst of the Cold War and sort of this constant bombardment of propaganda and try to sort of this enforced socialization. But in a very real way, it was kind of very instructive in a sense, because it was kind of a modernist approach to try to infuse ideas into people. But of course, having been brought up as being the first generation television viewers, the postmodernism, I kind of came in with my Cheerios. The idea was how to break that apart and realize that it can actually be reversed. It can be utilized as a way to break down, to expose the lies. But at the same time, the same methodology can be upgraded and actually be distributed to people at large, in which you can create images that are powerful, slogans and words that actually are meaningful, and actions that are quite symbolic, that actually tell a tale of your times, and minus the Hollywood production values that are required and budgets, in which amongst the people you can create moments that are of historic nature, and if they're handled properly, actually in time will become verified as having been an element of the history of not only of Chicanos, but of America and of the world. And of course, I've been fortunate to grow up in this great city where it's forever changing tectonically in a very real way. Nothing is stable, but in that instability comes great change and the opportunity for beauty, and it's actually through tectonic things that diamonds are formed naturally anyway. So. And I guess most recently, I have found that it's been ongoing. I wrote an article for the online journal for CalArts, which is called East of Borneo, and I had explained how I had once been involved in a peaceful protest in East Los Angeles, marching with a handful of people protesting the murder of Ruben Salazar. And when we reached a particular corner, which is Arizona and Whittier Boulevard, we were confronted by 25 police officers that opened fire on us with live ammunition. And many people were injured, and I believe many people must have been killed, but the official death count was 1. The official wounded count was 3. This moment was quite dramatic, because I know what it feels like to have bullets pass by you and the wind it causes. But at that day, there was a photographer next to me. This was before I had actually become a photographer, named Victor Aleman, and he took a photograph. And in that photograph, in the background, is the street corner of Arizona and Whittier, where at a later time with Osco, we returned and we created some of the more iconic imagery, which was First Supper after a major riot, and Instant Mural, and some of these other things. And it was it was always going back to create sort of these symbolic reinterpretations that incorporated pop culture and yet very meaningful to the Chicano culture, but at the same time twisted it in a way that would make it sort of surreal, and yet at the same time quite dangerous, because when we shot this, there was basically all of East LA was under some sort of general martial law anyway, and it was disallowed to take pictures on the street. And to create these images all on a single roll of film, which have kind of gone off to do quite a number of things, and still without the idea that it would ever even be paid attention to exactly, because at that time it was not incorporated into the mainstream art attention. it started trickling into the scholarly world, and maybe some people that were kind of sort of street-based artists. And it took a lot of work to really try to connect with people, minus the internet being an aspect. But it required us as artists to become researchers, to become advocates, to become very proactive, to learn how to adapt, and to step out of our environments, and to express not only our humanness, but also for us to recognize the people we were talking to, their humanness, and to then recognize that we all have something in common, and that is that as human beings, we're capable of creating, and most importantly, we're able to communicate and feel and understand that life is of value. And we live at a time where there are so many forces that are designed and to eliminate that sense of value and to categorize people as having no value, zero value, and people are only important based on their valuation, particularly in the sort of advanced capitalist state where you're only worth as much as you're worth. And in fact, and of course we had a very sorry example just a few days ago where someone's dragged out of his tent and treated as though he's even less than anything that's on the ground, whatever the reasons are for that. But it becomes sort of an ongoing mantra. The mantra is someone got killed, they made a mistake, whatever, they didn't know the rules. And the thing is there's so many people that are churned up in this meat grinder. And the thing is, because of the internet, we all find out how sausages are made, and we're not supposed to know, you know. And so the idea is that one must have to figure out how to throw the monkey wrench into that machine and make it stop.
Now, again, a follow-up question. I mean, you began that practice when you were young and apparently fearless.
Yeah.
Then you get older.
Right.
And you got a family to support.
Oh, yeah.
And it's, I remember at the time of the street artist show at MoCA, I heard a panel, and a street artist named Retina was on it. Yeah. And someone said, "Don't you feel bad showing in a museum? That's not what it's supposed to be about." And he said, no, first I get to show next to my heroes when I show in this museum. Right. But he said, second, I'm 45 years old. I have a family to support. It's dangerous to climb up on those above the freeway. I could get hurt. Right. And then I couldn't support my family, and I don't have time to go to jail. Anyway, I'm digressing, but you've gone on with the practice, but in...
Right. Well, you know, Stephen, when the OSCO show was happening at LACMA, some journalists asked me if I'd be willing to spray paint the museum with the other OSCO members, and I said, you know, back then it was something we did, but now it would be considered a felony to commit more than $200 worth of damage. And if the three of us did it, we'd be co-conspirators, and we'd all wind up in prison for life, and I would have wound up being a tattoo artist. So, you know, I'd be very good at it, but the idea is that, you know, yes, I'm 63, I'm a grandfather, I've survived my own youth, as it were, but I find that with every decade that I've lived, it's sort of a restructuring. I look back and there's a lizard skin on the ground. Who knows where it came from? It looks like me. It becomes something a little bit slightly different, but with it is sort of the experience. And I have found that it's been quite important to adapt and to recognize this. And even going way back to '72, many people wondered this whole notion of spray paint in the museum. It was actually designed as a reminder that the museum was supposed to be showing Chicano art. It wasn't that we didn't want to show in Chicano art, is that they were making the mistake of not including it and not being inclusive. And to this very day, it's not inclusive in its collections. And so, you know, it's the idea that the reminders have to continue, that everyone has to remain active and supportive, but also it's very important for young artists to produce, to learn, to make themselves known. I've been teaching at CalArts for quite a few years, and one of the things that's probably the most important thing is that I try to share with the young people is that they have to actually make themselves recognized for the integrity of who they are. And in that, once you have sort of presented that, you will actually generate some respect in people, and in that they will stop and they will listen to you. And they will actually look at what you do, and in that moment you have the opportunity to express your talent, your creativity, and your ideas, and that's how people actually become friends and are able to relate. And in the process, you actually, who are you associated with, you actually build on the institution that at some point you may have wanted to burn down, but you actually wind up adding an extra brick to add to that structure.
Thank you. Thank you. One of the things I left a lot out of each of the introductions because of whoever over here said I should edit. But out of Diane's, I left out the fact that she is president or chairman of the board of the Theater Communications Group. That means she's in an almost unique position to see the whole array of not-for-profit theater in America. Mm-hmm. And so as you talk now, I hope you'll in part reflect on what you see when you look at that large picture.
Certainly. I'm definitely inspired by my colleagues here who, inspire me to really look at where we're at. I, like Harry, I'm a product of the Chicano movement. How lucky that I had a struggle to participate in. And I always felt that there was a kind of power that I could feel that was inside me, although everyone was sort of telling me that there wasn't any power. And so I think that just to share personally, that I think the fact that I have been told no throughout my entire career, and that I turned those no's into yeses, has made a huge difference in terms of the trajectory of where I am today. And when I was at UC Santa Barbara, majoring in theater, and I wanted to be an actor, and I had a professor tell me, and he was trying to be kind, not to become an actor. He didn't think that I really had it in me. There was something inside that said, no, you know what? I think I have presence. I'm gonna continue. And in 2007, I won an Obie Award for playing 24 characters in an off-Broadway show with an amazing ensemble of other actors. And then I graduated, and I said, I want to go to Cal Arts. Steve was not the president at the time.
Thank you.
And I auditioned, and I was turned down. But in that same moment, I decided to join the Teatro Campesino and stayed there 11 years and learned what it was to be an activist artist. And then I came to Los Angeles in the 80s, and I played, pregnant girl number 1, 2, and 3, call girls, in the corner. And I met some other actors, and we were tired of playing stereotypes, and we started a company called Latins Anonymous. And, we did this for many years. And then I said, I want something different. I want a bigger palette. And this job at Center Theater Group happened. And I had a good friend who was working there and was convincing me, don't apply because, you're an artist, and why would you want to be an administrator? And 20 years later, I'm still there. I got hired, and I'm opening doors for artists. And I think that the fact that I have opened doors when doors were closed, and opened them for myself and for my community, and my community of colleagues and artists of color, and also artists in general, has made a really huge difference. I think that when I started out 20 years ago and to today, things are much better, and yet there is a struggle. The other day, we were here, I was working with Mark Murphy, who's a good friend and a colleague, and we do a lot of things together. And we were in a number of us were in the lobby here in October, and we were presenting Gob Squad. And Gob Squad is a company from Berlin. They're English and German, and I commissioned them, and they created a new work called Western Society. And I'm in the lobby. I commissioned this piece through CTG. My colleague who runs my program is a young Chicana named Patricia Garza. She's got 2 master's degrees, one in theater administration and one in business management. She runs our artistic development department at Center Theater Group. We were working with Edgar Miramontes, who's a programmer here at CalArts, and Armando Wipe, who also works here. All 4 of us were Chicanos, and we were working on a show that was from Berlin. It was not Latino specific. We were all experts in what we were doing, and we were contributing to the national dialogue and the national representation of what art is here in the United States. Wasn't Latino necessarily, right? That's a bright spot. There are many bright spots. So, Jeff says we're the same conversation. Well, it isn't really the same conversation because there's a lot of different things that are going on. Last year, 2 years ago, in 2012, I participated in a convening in Boston, sponsored by HowlRound. 80 Latino artists. We all went to Boston and got together and said, what the hell is going on? What can we do? Why do we always have to compare ourselves to the regional theater movement here in the United States? Why do we have to always feel like we need to get in? When in fact, we have to reframe who we are. We have to take the power back. We have to understand that we have power. And that we can create work ourselves, and create our own institutions that are an important part of the ecosystem of the American theater. And it was a really great conversation. And whenever anyone started talking like a victim, we would simply remind them that they were in a place of power. And to reframe their thought, right? And it was great. So last year, and Steve mentioned this earlier, we did the Encuentro, and it was here in Los Angeles, and all these 18 companies, we presented them, and it was amazing. And Jose Luis Valenzuela and I actually, admitted, we had our own prejudices. Oh, they're very community-based, which is, not very good writers. Well, we were wrong. There was something about so much of the work that had so much heart, and it was amazing, and that was doing the work that they needed to do in their own communities. They didn't need to be at a regional theater necessarily. Do you know what I'm saying? They were an important part of the ecosystem, and this was great. Next summer in Chicago at DePaul University, we are going to present 8 new plays by Latino artists. And we will be able to invite our colleagues around the country from regional theaters to smaller theaters to see the work and say, listen, there is Latino work and there is Latino writers happening in the United States. Please, here they are. On a silver platter, even. So that's really a bright spot. I've been president of TCG now. I'm finishing actually my 2nd year. And I tell Latinos who I hear complain, hey, we're at the table. As a matter of fact, I'm at the head of the table. So no complaint. If you have access, I am there. And there are many Latinos on the TCG board. That's another bright spot. In other words, we have made strides. Years ago, with my colleague Luisa Lashin, we were talking to an agent, and we were negotiating a deal at ABC to write a pilot. And the agent told us, there are absolutely no shortcuts. You have got to go through the world of TV as a staff writer, then eventually as a showrunner. And once you're a showrunner, then you're able to really produce your own shows. And that's the way that it is with theater. You have to enter it from the ground up and work there. Now, people say, why are you at a theater? Why are you at this theater that produces work that's not just Latino specific? Because I am there at a theater, and it's important for us to be at these theaters to be able to be an activist, to be able to keep those doors open, to be able to train, to move up, to be leaders. We have to participate in these theaters, and there's a plethora of young artists and producers and administrators that are now working at the regional theaters across the country. However, it is glacial, and really where we're at right now is that leadership change is slow. And these jobs at large, let's just talk what's called LORT, which is the League of Resident Theaters. And this is really the theaters that pay enough money for an actor, for example, to make a living. At least we hope that. And these, the leaders of these theaters will stay at the theater for 20 years, sometimes 30 years. This is a job you get and you stay at. So we are currently experiencing that there are no theaters to run. And you have to sort of hold it out. So somebody like me who has been going at it, been in the trenches and working myself up, is going to have limited choice in terms of what theater I might run. I may never be able to run a theater. And so you really are depending on the generations that are coming behind me to be able to be ready when those jobs, those prime jobs come. There was a job at the Guthrie Theater. And they only wanted, this is one of the largest theaters in the country. And the reason that obviously it's important is that, when there are gatekeepers, it's tough to get your work on the stage. So we want to be the leaders of these theaters. That's what we need. And they only wanted to see people who had run their own companies. Well, how many Latinos have run LORT theaters? Right? So none. So they interviewed a number of people, and there were even people that were running large theaters, the same size as the Guthrie. We're not interested in taking the job. And so they went to somebody, a man named Joe Haj. He's Arab American, identifies as of color. And he runs a company in the Carolinas, and he got the job. And I can't tell you how happy we all are that Joe Haj, who we know is one of us, is running one of the largest theaters in the country. And this will happen more and more as these jobs come up, but we have to be ready for them, right? We have to be ready. I think that one of the issues is also one of aesthetics. Our community has always done work that's been collaborative. There was a huge theatro movement in the 70s and the 80s. And these were companies that really, what we today call devised work, we didn't know what the hell devised was. We were doing collective creation. And there's a certain aesthetic that large regional theaters do not do, right? It's mostly playwright driven. And so, we are also battling against a kind of aesthetic that these theaters have grown around, and that's also a big struggle. So on top of being leaders of theaters, we also have to deal with a changing aesthetic an aesthetic that sometimes does not relate to what's happening in the world today. You look at Lin-Manuel, right? Puerto Rican, has written a new musical called Hamilton that's playing at the Public, spoken word, rap, about our founding fathers, played by Black and Latinos. It's an amazing work. He's taken history and made it so contemporary. And we understand that the founding fathers were as scrappy as young urban, Black and Latinos who have a grasp of language and who want to make change. And this is the future. And if our theaters do not buy in to the power that our communities have, they will die. And they know that. So we have to come with the attitude that we have something to offer, and it is their loss if they do not open the doors. And that's very important. The last thing I want to say is that it's up to all of us to pay attention to when these big jobs come up. Tell you right now, there's a job that's open at the Music Center, the president's job. Now, have we been watching that? Have we been looking and seeing who they're looking at? Who's on the search committee? And I can tell you it's not diverse. Who do we know that can be influential in getting somebody who is of color? And, my God, maybe even a woman to lead.
Easy.
Right? To lead. So we have to be also activists and vigilant in our communities to make sure that these jobs are going to people who are ready. Certainly, we're not saying that we're not ready, that are ready and that really address the population that we live in. So.
Rodrigo.
Wow. Did you say that someone asked you why you run a theater that is not Latino specific?
Yeah.
You know, that's the kind of question that always puzzles me, you know. Mr. Obama, why do you want to be president when there's so many white people in this country? Do you know what I mean? It's reductive, sadly. You know, there are, you know, in my business, which is film and TV, you hear the question forever, the Latino market. How are we going to get to the Latino market? Where is the Latino market? You know, the question for me is always, you know, it's a lot of Latinos, you know. It's a lot of Latinos, and it's a lot of different Latinos. You know, I had a very, you know, my background is very, you know, different from Harry's. You know, I was not born and didn't grow up in Los Angeles. My parents are Colombian. I grew up in Mexico City with a lot of privilege, with a lot of advantages, not just economic, but cultural. You know, when I grew up, I was being asked today whether I thought of myself as Colombian or Mexican. It didn't really matter to me. The brand Latinoamericano was very specific when I was growing up. And it included, you know, Latinos in the U.S. You know, that was, it was something that Latin Americans, you know, thought of as a greater population. You know, I did not come to this country like many people did, exiled from savage civil wars, either as political refugees or as undocumented workers. You know, I came with a host of advantages. I spoke fluent English because I learned it in schools in Mexico. My parents could afford education here. And when I arrived in Los Angeles to study film, one of the things that captured my imagination as a foreigner were certain lives that people lived in LA that I thought was an extremely lonely city. It seemed to me very spread out. You know, people were in their cars. When you first arrive in LA, you don't quite see it. You know, you're not as used to what the neighborhoods are, what the enclaves are. I was studying at AFI, so my first view of LA was very Anglo. You know, was very white. And I was immediately fascinated by what looked to me from my Latin perspective as, you know, very, I don't know how to say it without sounding, you know, very lonely, white American lives. And so the first 3 movies that I did were about those lives. So I was also interested in female characters. So I found myself very quickly in a situation where, you know, I think of myself as Mexican, and I'm married to a Mexican, and I speak Spanish at home, and my parents and my in-laws are in Mexico. And I'm making these movies about, you know, white women on the verge of a nervous breakdown. But you know, I always thought when I was doing that, I thought, well, but I'm Latino too, I'm Mexican too, you know, I don't need to be doing the movie about mi abuelita. I can do whatever the hell I want and still be Mexican, and still be Latino, you know, it doesn't, you know, there was a period where I worked on series, and there was a series in particular that I worked that happened in LA. And when we were doing with the assistant director, you do the extras breakdown. And he'd say, okay, we have 7 kitchen workers in the kitchen. How do you want to break that down? I would say 7 Latinos. And he'd say to me, really? He was white. He'd say, really? Don't you want to like mix it up? And you know, how, you know, you're Mexican. I said, guys, the kitchens in this city are run by Latinos. I'm not running away from that. I'm speaking the truth, and you honor them. Do you know what I mean? It's like when people are scared to say, oh, why is the housekeeper Latino? Because housekeepers are Latino, and they are one of the engines of the city. Do you know what I mean? What's insulting is when you do a character who's a gardener, or a maid, or a kitchen worker, or a valet person, or someone who's in prison, and you don't imbue each one of these people with the whole world of a character. It's not just the valet guy. It's someone that has a world as big and passionate and complicated as your own. You know, if you do that, then I don't care. I'll spend 20 years making movies about Latinos who are in prison or gardeners. That, you know, that doesn't matter to me. But what I'm saying is, you know, Latinos is a lot of people. My wife is Mexican, she's Jewish, so she's white. And often people say to her, really, you're Mexican? You don't look Mexican. And she's like, what the heck? You know, I am what I am. You know, I have a daughter who looks white, another one who looks like she's from Iran, and people talk to her in Farsi all the time. So, you know, this is back to that question, the Latinos. How do we break the Latinos? How do we get into the Latino market? How do we get the Latinos to do this? How do we get the Latinos would never vote for a black man. Latinos elected a black man, my friend. So let's get real. You know, it's that thing of being reduced. And I don't say it with any self-pity because, like I said, you know, I had enormous advantages. I really, you know, was able to come to this country with education, with money, on my feet, you know, speaking English, having visa. It's all, I was at a dinner party the other night and someone said very wisely about the Oscars, no one was asking Eddie Redmayne for his green card. That's right. So, you know, I always have mixed feelings when I'm in these conversations because you know, you know, I'm not saying we don't, but it's like saying, who are the Latinos? What are the Latinos? How do we get to the Latinos? Well, you know, who speaks for the Catholics? Who speaks for the Jews? Who speaks for the, you know, the Arabs? There's a lot of people. So I think as long as we are seen as someone who should only do Latino this, or someone who should only run a theater company that is exclusively about Latino things, you know, whatever is reductive is ultimately, you know, just poisonous, I suppose. Anyway.
Harry, I saw you nodding your head actively at what Rodrigo was saying.
I'm sorry?
No, I was saying this to Harry. You were nodding your head quite...
Yeah, well, you know, I think one of the things that I'm listening to is the first group I had, of course, was OSCO, and the last few years I formed another performance group called Virtual Verite, and maybe there's 100 members in the group that most of them are here in Los Angeles, but some are in Antwerpen, some are in Paris, some are in Mexico City, but you know, I'd have to say it's a very diverse crowd. They come from Asia, Europe, Africa, the United States, and they speak multiple languages. And the thing is that maybe half of them are CalArtians, but others come from different groups of people. And the thing is, I will travel to different places and do work with them. I was in Belgium earlier this year, and I had been there several times. And every time I went, they always referred to something known as the Mexican Bridge. And I wasn't quite exactly sure what it was in Antwerpen. And so the last time I went, I said, well, where is this place? And they showed it to me. And I guess in Belgium, when they build a bridge, they give it a name. And it was given that name in the 1920s. So I went, and I guess I'm the first Mexican that ever crossed that thing. And so what I did was I used the opportunity to work with 4 Flemish artists to create a welcoming committee for anyone who wanted to cross that bridge, and I use it as a metaphor for the U.S.-Mexico border, and how they would be willing to defend the right of anyone to cross any borders that were non-existent. Mm-hmm. And of course, I'd explained to them at a previous time that I was the 4th member of my family to visit Belgium. 2 had been in World War II, they fought, and my son, who just got out of the military, who had been on various assignments for NATO, who had also been there, and I had explained that I was here not on a purpose of war, but one sort of as to generate artistic and cultural peace. And so to work with different people in different cultures is very important, actually. But with that, you share your culture and incorporate your culture in the sharing, and in that, you break down the barriers and you understand one another, and then you recognize that this really is what the core of humanity is all about anyway. Mm-hmm. People rub up against each other, and they leave traces, and they leave memories, and yet they leave an imprint, and they leave their mark, and they have marked me, and I have marked them. And so that's what I relate to.
That actually seems like a really good statement to open up this to the audience, and if we could turn up the lights so we can see who's here.
Great.
There's people here.
So there are, on each aisle, there is someone with a microphone, and you just have to be witty, because we want this to be good.
I think there's a lady there.
Good. And if you could introduce yourselves.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sandy Escobedo. I am from the city of Val. You may have heard of it. I majored in art history. I'm the first in my family to go to college. I'm also a gaucho. I'm a fan of ASCO. Thanks to UCSB, I was introduced to your artwork. All that to say, everything that you're saying is very inspiring, but it's also very disheartening because, to the gentleman's early remarks, we continue to have this conversation, but at the end of the day, it's about action. It's about mobilization. So I'm just curious, what specific action can I take in addition to the members of my generation 24 hours from today? And how can I continue along with my generation to expose others to the imprints that you spoke of?
Well, I think first and foremost, you can support the work in theater. You can be an active attendant. You can go to theaters like mine, and if you don't like what you see on stage, if you don't see yourself, write, do a writing campaign with others, and let the leadership know that you need to see yourself on stage, and you can do that now.
Anyone else care to respond?
Also, yeah, Diane, I thought when you said it right, I thought she also meant for her to tell her story too. Yeah? Absolutely.
Absolutely. I think there's no need to wait for people to call you, to give you permission to tell your story. If you're an artist, there are so many ways of collaborating with people to tell your story. And if you so desire to be on stage, that's possible too, because there are a lot of venues in town that would be open to you.
I would agree with that. I think when you say, what can I do, start by doing your best work, because work will out. Of course, there are huge obstacles sometimes, but you do your best work. That's an area that you can control. You do your best work and hope that it finds places and venues, etc. But start with your own output. Don't ask for permission. I say that to every class I'm invited to.
That's right.
Around the world. I think it's Pahani is this Iranian director. He's forbidden from making movies and is under house arrest in Tehran. He made a movie on his phone at home alone. What's your excuse? I'm not saying you, but you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Actually, I saw a very nice moment at CalArts. I'm happy to say Rodrigo's a trustee at CalArts, and he was meeting with a group of students who were complaining that we didn't have the books in our library that they needed. They were Latino and Latin American. And there was a group that had formed themselves as Latino, which wasn't including the Latin Americans. And he said, look, you got to get together. Together, you represent a significant percentage of the total student body at CalArts. You can go make a demand. And if you're together when you do it, they'll actually have to listen to you.
Yeah.
And now we're buying different books for the library.
Be a pest.
It's
I've actually never heard a college president ask for a list of demands. That's pretty awesome.
well,
I just wanted to mark
I
that. That was kind of dope.
No, years ago I worked for Dick Lyman, who had been president of Stanford when all the violence was going on campus and sit-ins. And I said, boy, it must have been great to be president of Stanford with people so socially engaged. And he said, are you kidding? He said, I couldn't leave my home in the morning without being told I was napalming children in Vietnam. And I thought, well, you're an old guy. And then I had a sit-in in my office the other day, and I thought, no, it's not so cool. I don't like it so much. Another question.
My name is Castulo de la Rocha, and I, like a few of the people that are on stage, grew up during the late 60s and the 70s, involved the Chicano activists, fellow gaucho. You know, Dan and I have known each other for many years, and Harry, we've known one another. I got to tell you that while I was, and we've all sort of lived that incredible period of time in history that impacted all of us in very significant ways, and we're, in many cases, still living that period of time that shaped us and made us who we are as men and women, and as Chicanos and Latinos. I will say, though, I've grown up in a different environment and in the business community, and learned through business. I run a nonprofit organization, a fairly large nonprofit organization, and I've learned how to manage a business and do well in Latino markets. And it does matter how you treat a Latino market. It does matter what products, services, what value, and how that is delivered in the context of services to people. It matters, because you create loyalty, you create following. I gotta tell you that in theater, I haven't seen that sort of fundamental change in Los Angeles that really looks at what matters to this huge mass of people that Steve talked about just a few minutes ago. I mean, there's millions of people here, lawyers, professionals, engineers. Why is it that we're still not getting the sort of attendance in the theaters that are so critical? I have a response to that, but I'm curious to see what you all feel about that.
Diane, I think you got to start.
It certainly starts with the work. If we had the work that we were producing, I believe that the community would come. And obviously, we're not doing a good job of that. And I'm speaking for our theater. We are completely cognizant of it. And I myself am out there, trying to find plays. And I think when you see the number of young people who are coming up, we don't have the numbers who are writing for the theater. We just don't. There's something culturally, if your child is going to go to college, that's the last thing that your parents want you to do, is be in the arts, especially for Latino, Chicano families. You know that, you know, sometimes we're the first to graduate in our families. And so it's rough. It's tough. We just need more of those numbers of people believing that it starts that basic, that the arts are a valuable career path. It starts in some ways there. Not the only reason, but.
Let me ask you a related question, which I think
Yes.
feeds into this, or everyone. I used to be on the board of public television here, and the head of it used to say, well, we cover the whole gamut, 0 to 5 and 65 and above. I think Louise,
The bookends.
a fellow board member is here who will remember this. The station knew it was dying on this basis, but whenever it thought about putting something different in, there was this fear that, well, if we alienate the 0 to 5 and 65 and above, then we may be gone altogether. So there was a kind of institutional fearfulness that you'll lose what little you have if you open up yourself to more. You see that mechanism at work, or is that special for public television?
You know, there was an event that took place I guess it was in the middle of the 20th century, where there was an organization called I think Latino Initiative, I guess, for the PBS, and they produced a whole series called Chicano, which was a 4-part documentary, very extensive research, published books, published support materials, developed one of the initial big giant websites, and then it turns out there was a problem with the management of the actual organization, and got in a little bit of trouble. And so what happened was PBS pulled the plug and destroyed all the tapes and threw all the materials away in the trash. I knew some friends that actually pulled things out of the dumpsters. And thankfully, some of the things that existed in VHS tapes, and now they're on YouTube. But the whole history of the Chicano civil rights movement was actually thrown into the trash. And so, and of course, that's sort of, there are other kinds of moments in history, a cultural destruction. But one of the things that seems to take place is also the responsibility of the viewers not to support films and theater that promotes racism, not to promote hatred and negative stereotypes. You will go to any movie theaters on the weekend and people are standing in lines to be insulted, and they pay. And it doesn't make much sense. And the same with the television. You watch television and you would have no idea that there are any Latinos in Los Angeles. And the whole world gets this notice. And I tend to travel and give lectures in different universities, and even at this stage, I will go somewhere of a place of higher learning, and believe it or not, even most recently, someone asked me, the first question they asked me is, what gang am I in? Wow. And so, but it's sort of this repeated mantra of negative stereotypes that emerge from a system that actually predates all of us, and it also has to deal with nepotism and also kind of maintaining control of certain systems, but the democratization of media with the new media seems to be sort of a direction, and the process of trying to go through established theaters. And Dan, I think you'd enjoy this. The Ford Foundation did a study on Latino theater years ago, establishing all the funding of all the various groups, and I'm proud to say that Osco was the only one that had a budget of 0. So. And the idea is that sometimes it doesn't really take all that much to just find a street corner and produce something. And sometimes sort of the early lessons of Luis Valdez of just going out there, but then it's also securing the funding and the jobs. And once one gets a little bit too deep in some of these bureaucracies that have been pre-established, then maybe it's time to establish new systems that will support your work. And I think that's where maybe some of that actually lies. If there are no jobs, you create a job.
I mean, to be fair, there are theaters in the country that are working on doing more Latino work. I can think of Denver Center and certainly Oregon Shakespeare Festival. And TCG, Theater Communications Group, which is the National Service Organization for Professional Theaters, has a diversity initiative in which 20-plus theaters are involved in diversifying their staffs and their boards and their seasons. And this is an ongoing initiative. We're going to have a whole other group of theaters that are going to be involved in this. So it really is, Costello, it's a dire and urgent that we really expand what our programming is, and I think theaters across the country are aware of that. Again, we need people on staffs, artistic staffs, to really push and say, this work is valuable. People will read it, literary managers, and not understand it culturally in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So, you know, there's work to be done on both ends.
And I think there's also, you know, especially in film and TV, you know, a lot of Latinos, you know, are now more integrated. You know, they speak English at home, and they went to schools that are mixed. So a lot of those young Latinos just want to see Iron Man.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm not saying, I mean, that's whatever.
Yeah.
You know, that's their choice. But I think, you know, I wish we had more film and TV that is not just particularly for African Americans, particularly for Latino, but really stuff that, you know, that represents a plural society. I mean, just even look at this room. This is not 99% Latinos, and here we are talking mostly about this. But it's, you know, it's very mixed. It's very varied. You know, that I think there has to be work that also represents that. I'm not saying there shouldn't be work that represents primarily the African American experience or primarily the Latin American experience in the U.S. as immigrants, or the Latino experience in the U.S. But you know, I think it's again, we're trying to reduce it. You know, if it's for Latinos, then it just has to be about the Latino family. And if it's for African Americans, then it better happen in this city and be about this. You know, it should be stuff that's about how we live. And, you know, in some areas of the country, we live, you know, to some extent mixed. Not in all areas, sadly, but in many of them.
Is there other questions from the floor?
My name is Eileen Galindo. I'm an actor and a writer. And this question is for Rodrigo. First, I want to thank you very much for couching your comments in saying that we're Latin American. Being an East Coaster, being someone that my family's been here for 5 generations, we also saw ourselves as Latin American. It wasn't until I got into show business that people started to pigeonhole me as to what it was, what I was. My question for you, it seems that in film, and more so in film than in television, the Latino men have had great strides, and it's not about them telling Latino stories. They're you know, you guys, there's a small pool of you guys that are really able to tell whatever stories you want to tell. Whereas with the actors and the writers, we're sort of relegated to telling very specific stories. How is it that happened?
You mean well?
Well, in the sense that how is it that the studio heads are open to...
You know what, not out of the goodness of their heart, but because whatever makes money. Do you know what I mean? Whatever does well, whatever makes money. You know, there are... yeah, I mean, there's Latino stars, you know, like Antonio Banderas or, you know, Javier Bardem, but, you know, Penelope Cruz, or, I mean, you know, from Spain, from Latin America, wherever. But that is all very money-driven, and if your last couple movies made money, everyone's colorblind all of a sudden. You know, it doesn't matter. But if you stop making money, you know, and then also you said it's Latino men. You know, then there's a whole thing of, you know, men and women. I mean, the disparity in pay for female actresses of any color. You know, even you know, the big, you know, stars that are white. If they're women, they're lagging behind. I mean, I think it's, you know, big companies, studios, networks, you know, it's a business. It's a business. They're not here to, you know, to do anything but do well. I mean, they do, in all fairness, you know, some are better than others at, you know, incorporating minorities. You know, I don't want to say that they're all incredibly crass. You know, some do better than others, and there are companies that really, you know, make an effort to hire, you know, female directors on TV. You know, there are companies that are more committed to having, you know, Latino directors, women directors, you know, African American directors. But mostly it's about whatever is making money this week.
Let me ask you a related question, and maybe you don't know the answer. One of the sort of discussions that comes up in the course of Who We Be is the extent to which President Obama had to distance himself from being who he was in order to, if he wasn't very African American, then we could have an African American president. Is there a kind of, I mean, we now have these great Mexican directors who in theory could do anything they want. Is there an internal prohibition that says if we actually come close to other kinds of stories that?
I'm just jumping in because I know these guys well, you know, like Alfonso Cuarón or Guillermo del Toro, Alejandro González Iñárritu. Not these guys. I mean, these guys will do whatever they want. You know, they have a very world vision. Alfonso even an out of this world vision. You know, they all have been, you know, both Amores Perros and Babel took place in Mexico, or a piece of Babel took place in Mexico. You know, Alfonso did Y Tu Mamá También in Mexico. You know, they are a breed of director that's, I think, extremely talented, and they have big worldly ambitions. You know, they're not just running to make the Hollywood movie. I mean, in Alejandro's case, Beautiful was set in Barcelona with Chinese characters and African characters, and you know, Guillermo del Toro is, you know, he's in fantasy land. You know, I mean that in the best sense. I mean that, you know, he is the maestro of fantasy. You know, kudos for them. They have huge wings, and they'll do whatever their little heart desires, and they cannot be pigeonholed. I don't think they've, you know, abandoned their Mexican roots. I know for a fact they all have projects that they want to do in Mexico. But listen, whatever contributes to breaking the mold. Yeah. You know, 7 years ago, you know, Mexican directors. 10 years ago, now it's like, oh, Mexican directors. You know, so whatever breaks the mold, whatever breaks the stereotype, whatever can't be reduced, I think is good.
Actually, one of my fantasies for CalArts, given the presence of these great Mexican filmmakers in Los Angeles, is that we would start a new film MFA, which was based half in Mexico City and half here, with these as the faculty. I think we could do something that would just
I will apply.
No, you'll be teaching. It's getting late. If there's one or two more questions, and then we can continue in the lobby without the camera. Is there?
Good evening, Steve. It's Jose Luis. I think the take home for us this evening is questioning why, to begin with, why isn't REDCAT filled? Standing room only this evening. Why isn't it? We are mainly a Mexican city, founded by Mexicans, and we are a nation of artists. Mexico, Latin America, Puerto Rico, and the islands, we are a group of artists, first and foremost. And people don't know that if you have not been there, like you, Steve, but you have a home there. So that's one of my take-homes tonight. I see that Castulo, for instance, is one of those few very accomplished Latinos, Mexican, by the way, who does give back to the community in terms of dollars to produce plays and other works of art. There is, for instance, how many of us have been to see Chavez Ravine, the new revival of Chavez Ravine at the Kirk Douglas Theater? What an extraordinary work of art. It premiered here at the Center Theater Group, and the revival is ongoing now. How many of us do go to those exhibitions, buy art from Chicano artists and other Latinos? How many of us go to those concerts? I see another great patron of the arts here, grand performances. Michael is here. Thank you for including us in each and every season. It's amazing what you do. When the first year of Cal Arts, there were 8 Latinos. 4 of us were born in Mexico City, and the other 4 were Latinos from the United States. We've all gone on to somewhat distinguished careers. Cal Arts has gotten it up to a point and growing. The Music Center as well. And last but not least, I want to put in a good word for KPCC and the extraordinary work that they're doing, especially on Take Two. They are a program that reports the news on our community in Boyle Heights and East LA, in the Southwest, and Mexico, and the rest of Latin America. What they're doing on Take Two, no one else is doing it, in this market at least. And so I thank KPCC. I listen to that station day and night because they have the kind of programming that we should all be listening to. And that's why I'm here, because I knew about it through KPCC. So that's my take home. Why aren't we, more of us, participating in the arts or being patrons of the arts in our own way, purchasing those tickets to the theater and so forth. So that's my take home tonight. Thank you.
Let's have one last question or comment.
Oh, I was struck by Mr. Gamboa's comment about standing in line to be insulted. And without tipping my hand about how I personally felt about the experience of watching this film, I wonder if you all could share your thoughts on McFarland.
I have not seen it.
Yeah, I haven't seen it either.
So sorry. But now we will.
Just how insulted were you?
I mean, I personally could talk quite a bit about it. I mean, I just felt like I was saddened and angered by the representation of Latinos in that film.
Commercial and
yeah, and you know, there's a scene in the film where a Latino boy wants to go to college, and he's you know, he has his SAT book, and he's coming home, and his father, who's been itinerant and hasn't been really present in his life, and is, you know, punching walls, and, you know, is drunk, and all this, you know, just every horrific stereotype you can possibly imagine, turns to his son and says, you know, your nose shouldn't be in that book. Your nose should be in the fields. And in that moment, I said, why is this the message right now? There's not a Latino father on this planet who would say that to his son, that your nose is better off in the fields and not in the book. And this is the studio that built the theater that we're sitting in tonight. You know, the biggest and most powerful entertainment entity in the world promoting this kind of message. And throughout that project, there were similar kinds of things. The reinforcement of stereotypes that feel almost just, they're so archaic at this point. So in the spirit of this, I mean, I sort of wish you had all seen it, Rodrigo in particular, to sort of share, because it's on every bus and on every bench, and it's and it's really the Latino experience, but it's through a white lens, and so I think that there's something really, really reductive and really dangerous about it.
Well, one of the things is I travel in this city using only public transportation, and I have a daily experience of seeing everyone who's in LA kind of intermixed, and the real life experience is that different people of different cultures are with their children, and all the children are reading. And everyone's kind of really focused on making sure their children don't wind up in the news and wind up somewhere bad, and they look up and they see these ads, and everyone, I think, recognizes it as being a complete and absolute lie. And it's unfortunate that a well-known actor would take the lead role in promoting this. I guess the best thing for that film is that it should just die on the vine. So, I think that would be the word, is to tell people, maybe you rent it at Redbox and spend $1 and let 100 people watch it and make sure it doesn't get trickled up, so. Yeah.
I wonder, did you have other?
Go ahead.
I'm sitting here feeling like the conversation needs to be reframed, because we all have sat in these conversations for so many years, and I really feel like there's an energy that's being created, and there are a lot of good things that have happened to us. And yes, we know that there are problems and major issues that need to have our attention and our focus. But, a Mexican just won for Best Director, and a Mexican won the year before. Many of us are in positions of power. There's a whole new theater movement, Latino theater movement, that is afoot nationally. There are things happening that I feel we can really build on and have solutions. Yes, this is happening. We all know that there are issues, but the conversation feels like it should start on, this is what's great about what's happening. How can we build on it? How can we create solutions? I think that would be a great next step, Steve.
Yeah, fair enough. We have one last comment.
Hi, I'm Dolores Guerrero Cruz. I'm an artist, and I'm from Lake Arrowhead by way of Los Angeles, by way of Colorado. And I have to disagree with Rodrigo in that I think it's wonderful that any writer or director or actor can play any part and relate any story about white women on menopause or whatever, But my concern is who's going to share and tell the stories of Chicanos, Latinos, Mexicans. I'm going to just do it quickly. Brief history. My grandmother came from Guanajuato, Guanajuato, pregnant with 3 sons, and she her husband was already in Colorado as a farm worker. My grandmother came, joined him in Colorado in the 50s and 40s and 20s and 30s, where was highly prejudiced. But my grandmother managed to, I should not just say my grandmother, I was very close to my grandmother. My grandparents, they bought the first house. No, they bought a house, and they were the first Mexicans to buy a house in this farm worker little town. We came to Los Angeles, then my generation was born. My oldest cousin was graduated second to the top of his class at UCLA in engineering. He eventually became top engineer for Edison, and when he retired, and we grew up in Highland Park, 72% Latino in Highland Park now. And we grew up in Highland Park. He went to Franklin High School. Before he died, unfortunately, he was hired to help design the Gold Line in Highland Park, which was fabulous because that's where he grew up. My history is that my mother was half German. Her father was Fidel Overbay. He's in the Hispanic history books as Primera Familias de Nuevo Mexico because he settled in New Mexico. He was German. He married my little Indian grandmother, and he's in the history books. So my question is, if we don't tell our own stories, if we don't make our own films, if we don't write, I can't do it. I'm an artist. I paint, you know, so I can't write. I've tried, but I can't write, you know. So who's going to tell our stories if it's not our own people? Because the Jews tell their own stories, excuse me for the expression, you know, but, you know, African Americans tell their own stories. They have their production companies, they have their directors, they have their backers and producers, you know. And if we don't do it for ourselves, then who is going to do it, you know? I'd love to see a story. Oh, and by the way, my brother-in-law is Richard Duardo. I was just told that he was nominated on Facebook for one of the top 10 Latinos in the United States. Who's going to tell his story, you know? So tell our stories, you know? Don't be afraid to tell our stories. Even if you're Mexican, don't talk about a white woman on menopause, you know? I'm sorry, I'm not insulting you, I hope. But, you know, somebody has to tell our stories.
Look, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, I think when you are when you're a creative person, you have to balance everything. And, you know, you have a force that tells you what you need to tell. And, you know, so, yes, in that sense, you know, I am not contributing largely to representing the Latino community on screen, no. I hope that by making movies that people respect, I'm contributing to changing the image of what a Latino director can do. But I agree with you. I'm not, you know,
Well, I mean, I think it's multi-layered. It's multi-layered. We need people like Rodrigo, and we need people that are telling our story specifically, and we need more of us. And you know, the big point I think of tonight is tell your story. Tell your story. There is a way, and there's access, and do it. Do it.
And I can close with a quite optimistic note, because we're an educational institution, and we see remarkable generation of American Latino and Latin American students coming up who clearly have the will and the drive to do exactly what they want to do, and it'll be all over the map what they want to do, but it is happening. And the numbers we started with, that's who's going to be in college. That's where. That's what. Yeah. It has to happen. It's just some of us are in a position to try to help it happen faster and sooner, and each of us who has that opportunity ought to take advantage of it, which is kind of one of the messages of tonight. I want to thank.
Before you thank, I want to say that next time I do a movie about a woman going through menopause, she will be Latina. That's the compromise.
I want to thank our panelists. It's really generous of you to share with us tonight. I want to thank all of you for coming. It's a brave act to drive down, actually to drive anywhere in Los Angeles.
In any direction.
And I thank you for being here. And I do want to, there was already a quite lovely plug for KPCC, but we are really very excited about the possibilities of this new partnership. If you watch our website, you're going to see announcements of some programs that are taking place at the Crawford Family Forum in Pasadena that will be related to these subjects in some way, and I hope you will look as well as listen on the frame and take advantage of those opportunities as well. Thank you for being here, and good night.